In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, hello everyone, and welcome to the new episode of the Fact series in which we discuss international political matters every week. This is Foad Mahdavi, and in this episode, I have the honor of being the host of Ian Williams, a political commentator from the US. We are here to discuss the post-corona world and the decline of the United States. Thank you for joining us, Ian, and good to be with you.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much. For the first stride, I'd like to jump to the post-corona world. Without a doubt, the post-corona world will be a different world. Actually, that the world that is facing with this disease will have many consequences, and it seems that it will have a significant impact on the world economy and politics. How could you analyze it?
Well, this is a sort of a breaking point in a long-term trend. In fact, it brings up memories. It was around this time, at the time of the World Trade Center bombing, I was sitting within earshot of the World Trade Center, typing out an article on the downfall of the US dollar when I heard the crash. That was a precipitating occasion, which sticks in my mind now. But we've now reached the point where those trends are really accentuated. And the different trends are, first of all, economic. This is an economic disaster of the worst kind for the United States, especially, and for other countries. The United States is especially unprepared and unresilient for an occasion like this. Because neoliberalism has stripped away 30 years, has stripped away all of the social defenses. They've rushed in and they've provided money for people, but we see the consequences on the streets of Minnesota and Minneapolis. The tensions are building up. There are a lot of people with no safety net. The present administration has, at every level, state and city, been stripping away those social defenses in terms of health, social security, social provisions, and has also eroded every sense of civic responsibility and communal feeling. So it really is, I think, a major crisis in terms of US domestic politics. Internationally, the US is weaker than it ever was financially. It's also diplomatically stripped itself. There are many people who might disagree with China. There are many people who might disagree with the government in Iran, but they all agree that what the United States is doing about it is completely lawless and outside of the world order that has essentially kept some form of peace since World War II. The US actions are counterproductive from a US point of view, because frankly, the UN was often an instrument of US power insofar as the US was trying to maintain a world order. That's all going. The US administration has even less credibility than it used to. There's a strong feeling that the United States president has no concept of the political future or the economic future. And it's all at sea, and there's going to be a tendency for people to seize what they can. So we see China is going to try and take what it can in the South China Sea. Other countries are going to push and get what they can. And more dangerously, we forget this as well, is that a strong superpower can call people to order. Like, you know, in the old days of the Cold War, the Soviet Union could call North Korea and say, "Don't you dare start a war. We're not ready for it." Or, you know, they could call up Poland and say, "Don't you dare invade Germany at the moment." But the weakness of the United States, particularly in the face of Israel, means that they've got no control over their surrogates either. So now, in fact, the question is whether who is the surrogate of whom, Israel or the United States? So there's a very unstable world situation. And I wish there was some good news that we could pull out. I have often, over the years, hoped that the European Union would be able to form some form of counterbalance. And that's been subverted by the fact that the new East European countries and the neoliberals in the various European capitals have in fact been acting as surrogates of the United States quite often. But even they're revolted by what's going on. And the idea that maybe they mightn't like Putin, they mightn't like Russia, but they can see that Russia and China could provide them with a counterbalance. But there is no connected thinking. There's no coherent foreign policy. Or more to the point, there's not a coherent foreign policy with how to deal with what's almost a black hole in the center of world politics. The United States is disappearing into itself. It's got a huge amount of effect, but not very much power because it doesn't know what to do with it.
In this case, actually, some analysts say that the COVID-19 virus will increase the rotational power and influence from west to east. Do you agree with it?
Well, I'm not sure. Looking at China's response and part of the response to the virus, I'm not sure about that. But it is interesting that the societies that have proven the most resilient in this are what you might call the Confucian social democrat societies. It's been Singapore, it's been Taiwan, it's been South Korea that have actually pulled together with the social coherence and the foresight to plan both economically. And I've always said that the rest of the world is busily looking at the so-called neoliberal model, but the most successful countries are the ones in Asia that have resolutely ignored the neoliberal model, that have had a creative combination of state intervention, social provision, and allowance for enterprise and entrepreneurship. They have been the most successful societies in recent years, especially since Western Europe has, to some extent, stepped down from its old model and allowed neoliberal ideas to infect them. But that was, in fact, I would say that a far more potent virus for the destruction of the world society has been neoliberalism. It's far more corrosive in its effects and probably killed far more people than COVID-19. But the COVID-19 is the current precipitating event that's demonstrated just how ineffectual the neoliberal model is on every level, and just how callous its proponents have been. Whether it's the British advisor to the Prime Minister, who basically is ostentatiously shown that law doesn't apply to him, or whether it's Donald Trump with his, how should we say, ad hoc expedient justifications for whatever he does. The intellectual superiority was always feigned. It's almost gone now. But we're also faced with the terrible fact of the populism right across Europe and United States and other places, Brazil. It's not just a Western phenomenon, that politicians can now motivate people on outright xenophobic, racist, tribalist methods on every level. Take the small. Netanyahu has mobilized what you might call Jewish nationalism within the society. We have the United States, and we've seen the benefits of the so-called benefits of that. We have Brazil, where effectively he is wielding, Bolsonaro is wielding the white middle classes against the majority of Brazilian society, basically saying they don't care. From an intellectual point of view, it's a very sickening thing to see for somebody with ethics, but it's also extremely dangerous because you get blowback. You get people rioting and trying to burn down police stations because the police are seen to be alien invaders. You get people in Brazil who will go down there and they say, why are all those people sitting there comfortably on the beach when I'm starving in my favela up on the mountains? We're going to get it in India, where people are going to be sitting in those cities and say, why am I starving here while those fat cats are in their palaces with air conditioning and food and making it? I think it's, like I said, it's provided a precipitating event, a catalyst for big changes, but they're not necessarily beneficial changes unless there are people prepared to use them in that way.
So it could be interesting, but you're not sure about these changes, and actually these probable changes might not be
there
happen
will be changes.
In future.
Of that I'm sure. The one thing we can be sure, there will be
Am I right?
changes. What I'm not prepared to do is to say precisely what those changes are. We can see the parameters, but I mean, it really is, it's almost quantum uncertainty. It can be one thing or the other, or it could be a load of shades of difference in between. I mean, just think of the economics. For years, these people have been telling us that the basis of modern economics is that people have to work because they don't get money. They'll starve if they don't. And then suddenly they've opened the treasuries and stuffed millions and trillions of dollars and pounds and euros down people to keep them alive because they see the consequences are so bad if they don't. Well, this is in effect a rebuttal of everything they've done for the last 30 years. They've told us the money wasn't there. They've told us we had to have austerity in all of these countries. We couldn't spend money on hospitals and health and education because there wasn't any money. We've always known that the big small print there was the fact if there's a war we can find the money. Well, now there's COVID-19. They have found the money. They've produced it from nowhere. I mean, it's a miracle. Suddenly, trillions of dollars are available. Where 2 years ago you couldn't find it to pay for schools, you couldn't find it to pay for school meals, you couldn't find it to pay for hospitals. But now there are trillions of dollars suddenly pulled out of a magic casket, and it's there. So they have some explaining to do if they try to get back to normal.
Okay, and how do you assess the threats and opportunity of the post-corona world?
You know, I'm sitting in New York and I'm looking out, and I know that here in New York, one of the most sort of supposedly sophisticated and richest cities in the world, I can't see them from here, but I know just blocks away from here, there are refrigerated containers filled with bodies that there's no room to dispose of. The crematoria are overcrowded, the graveyards are full, the funeral workers are backed up, the hospitals are dealing with it. It's not very visible. It's not very visible, luckily for everybody. But the world has changed in a really big way. And the first point is to make sure that this doesn't happen. I mean, at the moment, it's a huge amount of uncertainty. Uncertainty is something that's really bad for economy and politics, for a lot of people anyway, because we have to explain will we still be alive in a year's time? I'm within the target age. If I get COVID, will I survive it? As a matter of fact, I spent 2 years in an ICU. I spent 3 weeks in an ICU 2 years ago. It's not a pleasant experience. I would not like to go through it again. I would really consider my options if it came up. But out there are lots of people who might be dead, and they know this. It's very difficult to plan. Why would you save if you don't know whether your savings are evaporated? Why would you build something if you don't know whether you're going to be alive to do it? Why would you build a business when you don't know whether your customers are going to be there? We're in New York. There's been a huge rush of rich people out of New York to the safe suburbs. They've gone up to the hills. They've gone to the beaches. They've left the poor people in the city. I'm a poor person for these purposes. But they've abandoned this. Nobody can plan. Nobody can seriously take decisions. So the first thing that needs to be resolved is the scientific, medical question of the coronavirus. Can there be a vaccine? Can it be cured? Do we know how to prevent it spreading? What the consequences are? And we really can't it's difficult to start working out how we rebuild the society. Then the second issue is how. What form of society do we rebuild? And there we have the other point, the potency of nationalism, of xenophobia, is it's frightening. I mean, we're in the position of all of those socialists in 1914 who thought the workers would never fight each other. We're in the position where people we thought were being civilized and had moved into the 21st century. I mean, America had elected a black man. They'd elected Barack Obama. And now suddenly we have a place where we have a policeman who apparently was involved in racist groups and support for Trump, killing a man in the streets in full vision of the television cameras. And people have reacted the way, in many ways, they should do. They're indignant. They're vitriolic about it. And all over the place, we've seen manifestations where the authorities are acting with impunity, where there's manifestations of outright racism. It's small incidents. A woman is told that she shouldn't walk a dog in a park where it says don't walk a dog without a leash, and she threatens to call the police on the guy in New York and say that she's being attacked by a black man. And she showed she was a liberal racist. She used politically correct terminology. She said he was an African American. She didn't say I'm being attacked by a black guy. She said I'm being attacked by an African American man. I don't know. So she was using liberal coding to express absolutely racist terms, which are obviously internal within her. And it makes you wonder how fragile this society is, because she is not alone. A lot of the people who will, if you give them an opinion poll, will swear blindly that they haven't got a racist bone in their body, but think and act the same way. And this society is profoundly fissioned that way. It's not as bad as it was when I first came here 30 years ago, but it is bad. And Donald Trump has managed to introduce a wedge in all of those forms of society. And it's why, listen, I know he's a cretin. I know he's, on the face of it, he is the most illiterate president they've ever had, and that's a high bar. But he has consistently, instinctively hit the divides. He's known where to go to introduce divides and to produce an us and them rationale in people, where us is his side and them is the others. He's a genius at that. It really is. I don't think it's a matter of high intellect. It's just, some people are good at hunting, some people are good at running, some people are good at swimming. He is good at fomenting divisions. It's what he does naturally. It's an instinct.
But in my perspective, we will see the last stage of the new world order in the post-corona era.
Inshallah.
The decline of the United States. Do you think so?
It would be nice to think so. But I mean, there was a Palestinian novelist who wrote a novel, Saeed the Pest Optimist. It was somebody who, pretty much consistently expected the worst while hoping for the best. And that is very much my overall philosophy. I would like to think so, but I fear that it's not necessarily going to be so, that the United States still has a tremendous amount of power. And you have to remember that the more foresighted people involved here, the ones who are behind the Iraq wars and the rest, and the current military spending, the project for the new American century, they had planned this. They knew the United States was in decline. And their explicit program has been to ensure the United States cements in its advantage for the future. And it's been doing that fairly consistently. It's built up the military. It's tried to squash any other sign of insurgent power elsewhere. It has disabled the international institutions, which might have put some brake or constraints upon the United States. So they know. I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the conspiracy out there is written. The project for the new American century basically is saying, hey, we're on the slide. We've got to cement in our advantage. And that's what they've done. And they're still doing it. And there is still an advantage. I hope, it is eroding. It's going. But there's no one to take advantage of it. This is, if there's a dialectic here, who's the other side? There isn't another side. The European Union has abdicated. China, if you look at the other coalitions that have grown together, like the Brazil, China, India, etc., the only thing they've got in common is they don't like the United States very much. They don't have a coherent counterplan. China and Russia are totally expedient. If they thought it was to their advantage to side with the US, they can do, and they do, and they will do. They can do, and the other powers are in the same way. There's no coherent opposition. And, naively, I thought that the European Union, representing a tradition of what you might call social democracy, old style of social provision, of state intervention where necessary, of democracy, of defending democracy and human rights insofar as possible, would be a countervailing force. Well, it isn't. I mean, how can you have Orban and the Hungarians as part of a democratic countervailing culture? How can you have the Poles and the other people in Eastern
Yes.
Europe on that? How can you have Boris Johnson representing democracy and social democracy? It has not worked, and partly it's our fault. We haven't won people over to this yet. But maybe the COVID-19 virus will give some opportunity for those of us that take a longer term view and take a communitarian view of the world.
You mean that the Americans' decline will play a role in China's rise to power?
Well, it's bound to in simple power forms. There's a vacuum being developed. The China's moved in to the gaps. The US has pulled out of international institutions. China's moved in, and I'm not saying good or bad thing. I don't like what China's doing, for example, in Hong Kong. I don't like what it's doing in Tianjin. I think it's repressive, but it has impressive achievements. To put it in old Mussolini terms, they make the trains run on time and they make the industry work. But I would not go to the Chinese for civil liberties, and I would not allow them onto the Human Rights Council. But I wouldn't allow the United States onto the Human Rights Council either. But these, it is, whether we like it or not, China is a growing force. America is a diminishing force. So obviously, they're going to shift. And I hate to say it, but if we take a step backwards and think of the way the last century's wars went, it was the decline of powers like Britain and the attempt by Imperial Germany to move into the gap that precipitated the First World War. The Second World War was when Germany and Japan tried to move into the gap left by the declining and withdrawing French and British. And these things precipitate events beyond our control. It is natural that China will move into the gap left by the United States. Russia is not a factor in this equation because it has its residual nuclear weapons, but I mean, it's an economic basket case. I'd rather put my money on Japan or South Korea than Russia as far as, economic futures go. It's big, it's got lots of people, it's secure against, it's pretty much impregnable for invasion, but it can't invade anybody else because you saw what happened when they tried to send a ship to Syria to fly the flag. I believe they had to go to a British naval, the old British naval base in Malta to get it repaired. They haven't got the apparatus, they haven't got the infrastructure, they haven't got the economy to do this. It's a kleptocrat economy based on taking oil, selling it to foreigners, and stealing the money for the kleptocracy in charge. It is not a rational economic model for future economic growth. Yeah. Name a Russian product that everyone in the world is wanting to buy. Exactly. Apart from vodka, there isn't one.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. At the end, if you would like to add something more, I'm all ears.
It's not often you get the chance to expand in a geopolitical sense like this. It is very pleasant. I mean, you have to take a step back and you have to be partisan. I mean, on a personal note, I grew up in Britain just after the Second World War. I used to play in the ruins of the bombed houses in my home city of Liverpool. They make wonderful mud pies. The bricks, when they're pulverized by the bombs, they're so powdery and fine. We used to play in them all the time. Yeah. God knows what carcinogens I got in. But that was one era. When I used to go to school, they had British Empire Day, and they had the kids waving flags because Britain, most of the map on the walls was still pink. So I've seen a few. I mean, I was in the tail end of the Soviet and Japanese empires. I watched the rapid decline of the British Empire, and I saw the signs in America when I got here that this is a place that's in decline. The seeds of its decay are there. It won't be time. The key for the decline of America will be whether an alternative currency comes. The UK managed for a long time to kick above its weight because the pound sterling was a reserve currency. It could pay people with paper for products that it wanted. The United States is in the same position. Its major export now is pallets of $100 bills going out. The day that we stop accepting the world stops accepting the dollar as a reserve currency will be a day towards stability and the new era. Until then, it's not going to happen.
Okay, thank you for joining us again, and I do appreciate due to your noteworthy remarks, and I hope things are going well with you and your work, far away from anything negative. Thank you very much.
Bye.
And have a good time. Goodbye. Dear audience, it was another talk with Ian Williams, a political commentator from the US, about the post-corona world and the decline of the United States. Thanks for watching, and catch you later.